been president. But being president is about two things in the end. It's about making good decisions, and then about the ability to translate those decisions into positive changes in other people's lives. Harry Truman used to say that he thought being president largely consisted of trying to talk people into doing things they should have done without his having to ask them in the first place. But he also complained that just because he ordered somebody to do something didn't mean it ever happened. And I say that because this issue has received almost no attention. This election has largely been broken down as an experience versus change. That's not what it is. It's good intentions versus the ability to make change. I'll just give you an example. We're here in a university setting, so there'll be a very high level of literacy in this audience about the problem of global warming, climate change. You know, it was a terrible tragedy when President Bush took America out of the Kyoto Agreement, where we were working with the rest of the world to reduce the dangers of global warming and secure the planet for our children and grandchildren. And both candidates on the Democratic side and Senator McCain all want to do more than the Bush administration has done. But here's the point I'm trying to make to you. 170 countries stayed in it. And of those that had to make any effort to meet the requirements, that is to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions below 1990 levels, you know how many are going to make it? 6. Now, these other countries, they didn't have dishonest or stupid or lazy leaders, but they could not figure out how to take their good intentions and turn them into positive changes in other people's lives. That is a whole separate skill and very important, because in the end, that's how you will measure the impact of the next president, isn't it? Were things different? So let me just deal with these points one after the other. First of all, let's look at the American economy. All the news coverage is about whether we're about to go into recession, but most Americans think they're already in a recession. And there's a reason for that. Incomes are flat and costs are exploding. In this decade, the cost of health care has doubled. The cost of a college education nationwide has gone up 75%. Energy costs per family are $2,000 higher than they were in 2001. And in this year alone, gasoline is going to go up an average of $450 to $500 a family. Food costs an average of $250 to $300 a family, and more if you have more mouths to feed. And that's because of rising energy costs, but not incomes. The first thing I want to say about that is you cannot get incomes up unless you create more jobs, good jobs. Look at this decade compared to the 90s. In the 90s, when I had the honor of serving, we had 22.7 million jobs. In this decade, 5 million, less than a fourth as many, although there are more people here. In that decade, almost 8 million people worked their way from poverty up into the middle class, and the welfare rolls declined by 60%. That's the American dream. In this decade, 5 million people fell from the middle class into poverty, most of them while they were working full-time. That's the American nightmare. Manufacturing jobs were increased in 6 of the 8 years I was president. This decade, they've gone down every single year, even with the American dollar dropping. Median family income after inflation went up $7,500 a year across all racial and regional lines in that decade. In this decade, after inflation, median family income is over $1,000 lower today than it was the day I left office. That's why most Americans think they're already in a recession. Technically, they are. They have had rising costs and flat incomes, so they have less money at the end of every month. So if you want to break out of this, and if your experience is what you really need is rising incomes, the first thing we have to recognize is we got to bring jobs back to the American economy. And if you look around, if you look all over the world, and as I already said, I do a lot of this work around the world. If you look all over the world, the only rich countries that are creating jobs and raising incomes and reducing poverty are those that have done something we haven't. They're the countries that made a serious commitment to energy independence through homegrown clean energy and energy efficiency. That is the key to our short-term economic future. So it turns out that doing the right thing to save the planet for the young people is the right thing in the short run to revive the American economy. Hillary proposes to repeal the subsidies given to the oil and nuclear companies 2 years ago when they were already making record profits and put them into a strategic energy fund and use that money to help create more jobs in every state in the country. More solar energy jobs, more wind energy jobs, more jobs from biofuels, more jobs from biomass, which is a fancy way of saying we ought to close every landfill in America and use the stuff to generate electricity. It will lower your bills and raise the number of jobs in your community. And we can put millions of people to work just making all of our buildings more energy efficient. Every school building, every college building, every government building, every hospital. We can go through the whole country. This is the only strategy that will create jobs in every city of every size, in every small town and in rural America. And as I was explaining to the mayors a few moments ago, you can finance all this through utility savings. It will not cost the taxpayers any more money, and we can put millions and millions of people to work. If you would like that kind of future, you ought to support Hillary for president. She gets this down to the very core. And there's also something else I want to say about energy. It not only will lower the utility bills of people in their homes and schools and offices, but if we do it right, within a couple of years, all of you should be able to buy and afford to buy a car that gets 100 miles to the gallon. Now think what that would mean for you. And you need the federal government to do this. Every time I say this, I look out in the crowd and I look for how many people said, oh boy, oh, Bill's lost it now. A couple of days ago, I was driving across Montana campaigning for Hillary, last week sometime, talking on the telephone to a guy in the Washington, D.C. area who is one of 50 of your fellow Americans driving a car that gets 100 miles a gallon in town and 75 on the highway. And here's how it works. It's kind of like a hybrid vehicle on steroids. You know how the hybrid vehicles work. You drive it on a battery to 25 miles an hour, it flips over into fuel. Usually gasoline, but it could be homemade biofuels in Indiana. And they get about 40 miles a gallon in town, about 30 on the highway, sometimes a little more. These cars have an extra battery pack that gives 40 more miles every single day on pure electricity and only has to be charged at night. So they drive on the battery to 40 miles an hour, sometimes 45. Once you do that in town, you're at 100 miles to the gallon. And these batteries are manufactured in the United States of America and the state of Massachusetts. They are American manufactured batteries. Now, so if they're there, why do you need a president? Because they're too expensive for you to buy. Every young person here knows that all electronic products get cheaper as you produce more, right? Flat screen TVs, iPods, iPhones, most recent incarnations. It's been that way since the advent of televisions and transistor radios. More you produce of them, cheaper they get. You need the president to invest money out of this strategic energy fund to accelerate the production of these batteries with sufficient materials at an affordable price so that every American get it. But just think about it. If a couple of years we could all buy 100-mile-a-gallon cars and we got a tax credit to cut the price differential, think what we could say to all those people that sell us oil. We could say, shoot, charge $110 a barrel. I'll go on, charge $200 a barrel. You charge whatever you want. We're going to keep our $350 billion at home in the pocketbooks of our families, in the future of our children, in the jobs of the 21st century for America. That's what we're going to do. It would make a tremendous difference, and it's one of the reasons you ought to support Hillary for president. We can also create jobs repairing our roads and bridges. There are all these things that you can do with stuff that's here in America. You cannot outsource any of these jobs because you have to be on the site to do them. The second thing Hillary wants to do is to continue to support Senator Evan Bayh in his drive to make sure we keep defense manufacturing jobs in America and not let our national security essential jobs be sent overseas. There is no reason that any trade law should require